let's talk a little bit about the supply side of this. We've heard from a lot of other companies, Tarek, about the demand is there, but getting the parts and components necessary to meet that demand just isn't quite where it needs to be. When do you get to the point where that supply chain is back where it needs to be?
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for having me on your program today. I'm very pleased to be here. So it's a great question to start our conversation with. Look, supply chain has been disrupted in our industry for the past 5 quarters, and it's nothing new. Supply chains around the world, particularly in tech, are decoupling following the pandemic. It's a new reality that we have to live with. The world is no longer flat. Pre-pandemic levels, we could place an order anywhere you want in the world, and that order would be met. Somehow all the components would show up at our manufacturing sites, and then eventually the solution would be manufactured and the order would be fulfilled and shipped. It's no longer the case today. It's a very different world we live in. It's a world where you have to think about your supply chain, not just in terms of cost, but you have to think about the supply chain in terms of resiliency, speed, and also, of course, cost. And we have equipped ourselves to deal with the shortages of some commodities that have affected us in the past few quarters. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've been navigating this very, very well since the trough of May 2020. And the reality of it is that in the past quarter, we posted $7.35 billion of revenue, which is the highest watermark ever since the first quarter of 2019. So we're on the way up. And it's part of what we have to do today to navigate supply chain constraints.
Are you changing any of the way in which you produce, where you produce, how you produce it? Are you onshoring more? In the longer term, how does it affect your business model?
Look, we have to adapt. We're not changing necessarily where we produce, but we have to think differently in terms of where we put our inventory hubs. That is, of course, all designed to ensure resiliency in our ability to manufacture and fulfill the demand. The demand remains very, very strong. So it doesn't fundamentally change our business model. We're just building our supply chain to be a lot more resilient because the demand is off the chart. I mean, we have demands across every aspect of our portfolio. And if you look specifically at the fourth quarter, we ended up with a record quarter in order terms. We finished the fourth quarter of fiscal year 21 with a 28% rise in orders across our portfolio. That is unprecedented, and that has to do with the fact that companies are learning the lessons about their business models. They have to digitize their business models and are taking steps to do so. So we feel very good about the demand, and we've adapted our supply chain in consequence to meet that demand.
Demand is strong, but some analysts highlighted maybe a weaker than expected Intelligent Edge revenue, only up about 4% on a year-over-year, 2% when adjusted for currencies. Is that a supply chain issue? Where are you feeling the brunt of the supply issues?
It's a great question. So we did experience supply chain issues more exacerbated in our Edge business, but the result in Q4 was not the function of only supply chain issues. There was a very specific, very large transaction that we booked as a service, meaning it's a transaction that will be recognized over time in our P&L and was booked in our balance sheet. If you adjust for the impact of that transaction, you have to up the growth rate by 800 basis points and the operating profit margin by about 500 basis points. So all in, our Edge business continues to perform extremely well. We have very high expectations internally about what it can do in fiscal year 22, and we feel very good about it.
With regards to just the type of enterprise spending that we've seen by corporations on IT and enterprise services during the pandemic, and there's been a debate as to how much of that spending continues post-pandemic. Can you give us a little insight, not only for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, but really industry-wide, whether you see that trend sustaining itself and what that sustainable growth rate could be?
So it's a wonderful question. So I think the trends are very powerful and very sustained, and they fall into 3 categories. The first category is all about connectivity at the edge. Networks are ever expanding. Your own company is expanding its footprint, and we're all working from home as a result of the pandemics. A lot of us work in remote locations. This requires connectivity. Connectivity is one of the most powerful trends that we capitalize on. The second most powerful trend that we capitalize on is the explosion of data.
Yeah.
Data is generated in ever greater quantities, starting from the edge, and has to be transmitted all the way back to some data centers, whether they are cloud data centers or co-locations or on-premises data centers from our customers. Data doubles in the world every 18 months. It's a staggering number, and it hasn't been going on like this forever. And the more the world becomes virtual, the more the world evolves towards the metaverse, the more the world evolves with IoT, the more you're going to have data, and that's a very, very powerful trend that is there to stay for the next decade. The third trend is the way enterprises think about their investments in infrastructure. One thing that the cloud has been very successful at delivering is an experience. That experience is something we can capitalize on creating that same as-a-service experience at the premises of our customers. Effectively, what that means for enterprises is that they don't need to deal with managing the infrastructure themselves. They can rely on our capabilities to actually make sure that the solutions are run and managed with a consistent cloud-native platform that we have built. That relieves them from having to deal with the infrastructure so that they can focus on building their application solutions to manage their business. Those three trends, connectivity, data, and cloud-managed infrastructure, are very powerful and there to stay, and that is the essence behind our strategy.